any tips for people in similar situation like me, that there's so much, because I share your view that, you know, to give people freedom on, you know, choose the best, you know, the teams, the best technical solutions for them, and use, you know, the tools that suit them. But at the same time, if people are engaged in more than one team, more than one initiative, that can be, you know, the amount of tools available there, and that you have to remember that you communicate with those via this tool and with those people via different tool, it can be overwhelming. Do you have any tip for people like me how to manage the tools better, or, you know, the sense of not to be overwhelmed with this idea?
I do, and it's an agile tip. So get ready for that. Remember the Agile Manifesto when it talks about simplicity?
Yes.
Simplicity is the art of maximizing the amount of work not done. When you're thinking about your tool stack in a remote setup, simplicity is maximizing the number of tools not used. Now, let me clarify that for you. When you're working in a distributed organization, in a distributed team, you need to really understand that communication divides in two different types. One type is synchronous communication, and that is online meetings, that is chatting with someone, that is you say something, I say something. We engage in a conversation in real time, like me and Joanna, we're doing this right now. The next one is asynchronous communication. Asynchronous communication is when I say something and I wait. And you get that information, you consume that information whenever you're mentally, physically, and emotionally available to consume that information. Now, there is a fundamental difference between these two different types of communication. In synchronous communication, meetings, chats, real time, the speaker says something or broadcasts the information when he or she is ready to say it, regardless of whether or not the recipient is ready to receive it. Whereas in asynchronous, the speaker says the information, broadcasts the information when they're ready, but the recipient is given the freedom to receive the information when they're actually ready to receive it. It might sound like it takes a lot of time if you rely on asynchronous more than synchronous, but what it does is that it actually brings peace and sanity to the collaboration. So if you are working in a remote team, in a distributed organization, you really need to get comfortable with asynchronous communication and default to asynchronous communication. As the founder of Basecamp says, write it down instead of chatting it up. And the reason for that is when you are writing things down to be consumed at a later time at someone else's convenience, you actually think through what you want to communicate. You really cook the idea before you convey it. While in chit chat, in meetings, there are so many half-baked ideas that get exchanged. And at the end, you might not even actually make your point come across as you intended it. So you're saying, what do we do with this overwhelm of tools, right? So having learned these concepts, the difference between synchronous and asynchronous, and how it's important to default to asynchronous, I'd say take another step and look at the tool stack that you have. How many tools do you use for synchronous communication? And how many do you use for asynchronous communication? Remove much of the synchronous ones and default to one asynchronous. You use a task management system? Do you use Trello, Jira, Asana, Basecamp? Whatever that is a communication tool. Keep your work organized and really see it as a communication tool. If you learn how to simplify your processes in one tool, chances are you don't even need a chat tool. You don't even need to have meetings, right? That's the extreme. But the idea is there to really default to one asynchronous tool that can help you synchronize, come together, and really convey information that needs to be conveyed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And can we go a little bit deeper on some tips, maybe and advice for people about when is when would be the best time to use asynchronous communication and what the synchronous communication is useful for. Recently, I came across a talk with some executive, and I love the concept. In order to reduce amount of meetings, she requested the team to send a video status updates. So she wasn't doing, the team, and she requested it's no longer 3 minutes, which I thought, to manage her own time, which I thought, oh my goodness, this is a genius idea. But like so many people that I know would go for it. So can you give us a little bit more tips so we have ammunition when we have conversation to persuade people to do that kind of way of working?
Well, video is a sensitive subject because you can't force people to record themselves on video, and you shouldn't, because video, audio, there are digital footprints that not everybody is comfortable sharing of themselves on the internet. So if you're any kind of manager who's forcing people to be on camera, you're doing it wrong. Please stop, because you're taking people's freedom away from them. They have the right to privacy. They have the right to choose how much digital footprint they put. Respect that. But going back to the asynchronous, how do we encourage people to actually do that? Well, here's the thing. Most of the effective remote teams that I have worked with, their daily check-in, their daily scrum is actually in writing. And it's not even on video. They actually write it when they wake up in their own time zone. It's their morning, and then it's all accumulated and the team can actually see. Some other teams don't have daily check-ins. They actually use the one task management tool that they have and the features that tool provides to check what everybody's up to. There are so many different ways of looking at it. I think that the main challenge is that many people have the mindset of co-location, and then they want to copy that exact practice into a remote team and see it work. Well, it doesn't always work. When you're working remotely, you really need to fundamentally change the way you think about communication and collaboration. It's not as easy as, let's just copy paste that thing that we did in person, standing in a scrum, and let's not do it on video. It's not as easy as it sounds. So you're saying your question was tips on making
what's the best use of each type of communication, and how if you can give us some tips how to persuade managers to use one asynchronous instead of synchronous, just
right, so
to reduce meetings, reduce amount of meetings, basically.
I answered the second part first. So the first part is, what type of communication is good for what type of information exchange? Well, I'd say that synchronous is great for quick synchronization, is good for quick decision making. It's important and essential and necessary for conflict resolution. And it's also very helpful for coaching. Maybe there are other cases for that too, where you actually need a meeting, where you actually need an in real-time exchange of information. Asynchronous is good for collecting data, collecting ideas and opinions. It's for sharing information or broadcasting information. And it's also very good for basically gathering any kind of information that needs to contribute to a decision making. Let's choose an example. Let's choose retrospective as an example. It's a meeting that in a co-located office, the Scrum Master usually books it, or maybe someone in the team books it. It's usually happening in a conference room. People go to the conference room, they use the stickies and walls or whiteboards, and there is usually a data gathering part at the very beginning where people sit quietly and jot down their ideas on their stickies, right? Now, what is happening nowadays in Scrum teams online? Most people do the exact same thing on video. You go to a video conferencing, and as a Scrum Master, you let people silent writing time. That time alone frustrates people because they're sitting quietly and awkwardly in front of a camera. They don't like it. Most people don't like it. Many are trying to convince themselves that it's okay, that it's part of the job, that maybe I just need to get along with it. But hey, it's gathering of data, which can very easily be done asynchronously. So what I do when I work as an agile coach for a team is that I usually I use different tools for this kind of activity. But I'm not going to just mention any tool. Choose whatever tool you already have. Don't add to your tool stack. Choose whatever tool you have. Create a board for that retrospective of the sprint. Send it to people in the sprint planning or at the beginning of the sprint and ask them to add data to the board as the sprint is going along. So when you come to the retrospective, you start with check-in and then you have all the data already. So the time that you have booked for people to spend time staring at this square in front of them, which is not very pleasant most of the time, it can be used for effectively connecting and having really productive conversations. Your retrospectives will magically become a good thing rather than a frustrated thing followed by a discussion that people would rather not engage in. It's a very quick shift, right?
Yeah.
Another example I can give is all staff meetings that many of those of you who are executives or top managers are calling for. So you used to stand on a stage in the common area in the office and you used to tell people, you know, all this amazing information and sales data and showed it on a screen and people loved it. There was engagement. But nowadays that you're not in an office, you do the exact same thing, except that people are lying down on their bed or, you know, sitting like that on a couch and they're half engaged and watching and it's like they're watching a boring TV show. No matter how you try to make it engaging, it does not work as well as it did in the office, right? So what can you do to change that? You do see that I'm moving around when I'm talking, right? You can do this exact same thing, really engage with your camera at your own time and send the video to people to watch when they are mentally, emotionally, and physically available and ready to receive it. Right? So all staff meetings are broadcasting information. You really don't need to bring 200 people together on a video conferencing at the same time to broadcast information to them. Be conscious of when you call for a meeting. I have a famous sentence that has been quoted quite often, and that is, if you can solve a problem without a meeting, solve the problem without a goddamn meeting.
Yeah. I think I'm not surprised why it goes so, you know, why it's so popular. Yes, it again, you know, I'm sure lots of people can, you know, can relate to it.
Yeah, the thing is, we don't recognize, you know, a lot of people who have never really been trained for effective communication in remote teams, they default back to meetings because that's what they know. That's what comes with the culture of always having worked in an office. You always you feel okay going to someone, interrupting their flow of productivity and just getting the answers that you need right away. Well, now we really need to change that. We need to respect people's freedom. And on the other side, people can actually choose to turn off notifications. So you can't even tap on someone's shoulder anymore digitally, right? You can't interrupt them if they choose not to. And that's a good thing.
Molood, so again, I'm very new to the remote work, so I would be coming from more traditional way of thinking. But how I'm thinking is, you know, everything what I believe and what I saw evidence is that people written communication, you know, we communicate only around 8% via words. And majority of communication happens, you know, via different means than words. In nonverbal communication, you know, tone of voice, you know, pace, our body language, and so on, so on. So I'm kind of worried when you cut that, you know, the most efficient way of communicating and you only leave words, then the communication is not the most efficient way of working. So how, you know, I'm sure you probably already thought about it because you would be, I guess you would be familiar with that concept. Do you have any, you know, counter arguments to my way of thinking to help me to go more at ease with this asynchronous way of thinking?
I don't know if I can convince you or anything, but I can share how I think about it. And I understand it's a challenge, especially if you are an extrovert person. You really need that connection with people. You really need to be able to read their body language to be able to communicate effectively. But here is my challenge for you. Why do people communicate?
to exchange information.
And why do they need to exchange information?
To be more efficient, to ensure they work collaboratively, so they create better solution, whatever it's more creative or more technically better, but to make sure they align.
Well, there you go. People communicate to collaborate. That's the purpose, right? And we collaborate so that we can co-create, right? So now you're saying there's one method of communication that's really effective. That's being together, being able to see each other, read each other's body language, pick each other's energy, and smell each other. Yeah, that's great. But what if the reality is not allowing us to have that? Are we still able to make deep connections and exchange information with other people? If you live far away from some loved person, a family member, like, if you're an immigrant, you probably have experienced this. Being far from your loved ones, you still try to maintain that relationship and keep it as deep as possible. How do you do that without being able to see each other all the time and exchange ideas and smell each other all the time? You manage to do that very easily when it comes to a family member. And then when it comes to the work concept, suddenly it becomes so difficult and it becomes such a barrier, right? So think about how you make and maintain connections remotely with someone you love, you care about. Here's an example. If you're chatting with a loved one who is far away, maybe it's your sister, your mother, your spouse, whoever, you're chatting with them and you're having, sharing some nice gifts, and maybe it's like kind of a lightweight thing. And then suddenly you sense that something you have written may have offended the other person. You sense it from the writing, right? Sometimes it's possible. When that happens, what is your natural reaction to resolve that conflict? You pick up the phone and you call them. Why do we do that? Because we want to expand the bandwidth of communication. So if you think about being co-located, having the ultimate bandwidth, we can see each other, we can hear each other, we can touch each other, we can smell each other. That's like as much as possible. Now, then the next level is video. In video, we have picture, we have audio, and we also can see a little bit of each other's surroundings. And then the next one is audio, where you don't see that anymore, but you can still pick up on the tone of voice. You can still see the pace of voice. After that, that's chat. Chat is kind of dead when it comes to nonverbal, right? You only have words to exchange. Yeah. So when you're thinking about what do I need to think to challenge myself that? Well, you actually don't. You're thinking on the right path. It is just that our reality is asking us to learn new habits. So how can I bring that deep level of connection that I could have with people in a co-located setup into only chat? You can't. You need to combine different methods, different levels of bandwidth for different types of communication. So a key skill that you need to develop is the ability to choose what you're communicating and choose whether you need, chat, audio, video, or co-location, and then think about what it is that you need to convey, and then choose whether you should have it asynchronous or synchronous. So the combination of these two dimensions is really the key skills and the key habits that we need to learn to adopt in order to become better at remote working.
Yeah. Okay, and now I understand that, and definitely we are on the same page, because I think it's a balance. It's being the most efficient way, so choosing smartly the tools we are using to be the most efficient, but at the same time, you cannot, you also need to think how to build that connection, and you cannot just do it via verbal communication, written communication.
Some companies do that though. Some companies have no meetings at all, and they're very effective when they work remotely. And they do make connections happen, but they also hire people who have been working remotely for many years. If you meet developers who have spent their entire careers, decades of their careers, contributing to open source, you might even discover that they have friends with aliases. They may not even know the name of their friend, but they have collaborated with this person on the code base, and they kind of know them, but the language that they have connected through is code. And it is, again, a completely different form of connection than we're used to. It's the new world. Look at your kids and the way that they interact with technology, the way that they interact with their friends, even when they are in the same room. And then you'll realize what it is that we really need to adopt and aspire to when it comes to effective communication remotely.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can, again, I do understand it, because I would be engaged in different initiative with people overseas, and I feel like we connected, we are friends. You know, I know a lot about them, they know a lot about me, even though we've never seen each other. And
Exactly.
so definitely it's possible, but we would do it a lot of camera, not a lot, sorry, not a lot, but you know, we would have some time that we just exchange messages, but then when we want to connect, we would just see each other and use the camera for that. Yeah, so I cannot imagine doing that without the camera, but you know, like, the world is evolving so much that, you know,
It is.
Yeah.
It is. I actually have a friend who invited me to her wedding, which got canceled this year because of COVID. I have never met her in person or on video, ever. I have only been talking to her in chat, sometimes sending each other pictures, and that's really it. She's on the other side of the pond, and I'm here in Europe. And she actually felt so close to me that she invited me to her wedding. Like, imagine that. It's really possible to start a relationship in chat. It's really possible to go deeper in the connection in chat, but you need to learn how to do that. One of the key elements of being able to get really good at written communication is assuming good intention. I am still working on my own communication when I am communicating with others, but I have really become good at assuming good intention. And that is, every time I receive something, I don't associate any special tone to it or any special emotion to it. I don't ever think that people are being evil or offending me or attacking me in any form. And that's important that we all adopt that mindset, because not everybody is good at written communication. It's a new skill that everybody is learning right now. So whatever message you receive, before you respond back in an angry tone or in bad words that might offend the other person, just take a step back and think, this person is a good person. They probably meant well. They maybe couldn't communicate it the way they intended to. What question can I ask to clarify it? And then ask a question. And try not to point fingers at people, separate from the culture of blame and assume good intention. And you will soon see that it's possible to build deep connections by just chatting with people, just like your kids do with their friends.
Yeah, very valuable advice, Molood, because I think also what I've noticed from my situation, that different cultures communicate differently. And, there are people coming from very direct cultures, people coming from very indirect cultures. And very often there's lots of miscommunication based on misassumptions, purely based on different style of communication.
Exactly.
So really good tip. Yeah. One more question. Because this is something what I struggle as an agile coach. So what I've noticed, I've noticed that very often, like, asynchronous communication drags. So somebody sent an email, then person a few hours later replied, what do you mean? Day later, somebody replied this, and then later, half a day later, a few hours later, there was a question. And, communication can be organized like boom, boom, would drag 3 days. So I was always telling people, take a phone, clarify it. Don't use, emails for that. But now you are challenging me on that way of thinking. So can you give me a little bit more, tips in that area, how to be asynchronous, but at the same time, most efficient, so this communication doesn't drag unnecessarily in time?
Oh, yeah. Remember the rule of simplicity in remote work?
Yeah.
Getting rid of tools as much as possible, sticking to one or two. There is also another rule in remote work, and that's exactly related to the question that you're asking. The way to do this is to make expectations and agreements explicit. Do you have an agreement that is explicitly there, outspoken? How much is the response time to a message in a certain communication tool? Have you ever talked with your team about the fact that when we're working, for example, on the top priority, that the response time needs to be maybe shorter than other times. I think that this all stems from a lack of explicit agreement. So people assume different things for the communication that they're having. So I would say step one, sit together with your team and create a team agreement for only the way that you communicate together. What tools do you use? What is the response time? How do you manage priority? How do people know what is next on their plate? How do they know when they have a dependency to someone else? All of this is something that in an office environment we don't necessarily talk about, because we sit together and you can just tap someone on the shoulder and get your answer right away. When you go remote, you need to bring all that common sense stuff onto the digital paper, onto a page.
Yeah.
So make your agreements and expectations explicit.
Yeah, and you just call me out on it, and this is 100% what you said I'm not doing. So I would always have team notes and team agreements, but they wouldn't go in that detail. What's the response time on that channel, Can you tell us a few things about this amazing remote work, remote forever summit that you are organizing about it?
Absolutely. Remote Forever Summit is a 6-day online experience where in 2020 is the 4th time that I'm organizing it. From the very beginning, the mission of the summit has been to bring remote working into the world of Agile. So every year I invite the top minds of Agile and the top leaders of remote working to come and share their experiences together. This year, I've done something slightly different and kind of special, and that is I have trained all of the speakers in story coaching. And I did not give the training. I actually hired a story coach who is an expert in this. But this year, because I know that many of you have been going to many online conferences and webinars where there's a speaker, they share the slides, and then their screen goes into the corner and it's a tiny little square, and you get disengaged and you look away. So I thought, I'm going to bring you a refreshing experience. So in 2020, you're going to hear inspiring, educational, and memorable stories from all these experts who have been working remotely for over 10 years, and all of them have been working in an Agile organization. So this year is quite special. I have people like David Hanson, the co-founder of Basecamp, who is a thought leader in remote working. He also wrote the book Remote a few years ago. I have people like Jürgen Appelo, the creator of Management 3.0, and also now the founder of ShiftUp. I worked with Jürgen as his COO for about a year. I recently left that company. I have invited Lisa Atkins, the author of Coaching Agile Teams. You should actually go and look the speaker setup, the speaker lineup yourself, and decide for yourself. And the greatest thing is that it's free to join. It's possible to upgrade to a premium membership after you get your free access pass. And then you will have a lot of bonuses from the speakers and sponsors, as well as the recording access, lifetime access to the recordings of the summit. So join me at remoteforeversummit.com, and I'll see you in November 11th to 17th.
Lovely. I'm definitely looking forward to it. And I already look at the lineup of the speakers. It's amazing. And
I think so.
Molood, I'm very conscious of the time, so thank you very much for joining me. If I could, I would be speaking with you for another hour. I have so many questions. It was so, it was inspiring for me, but also it was extremely practical, and I could relate to so much stuff what you're saying. So thank you very much for your time. I very much appreciate that.
Thank you so much for inviting me and having me here.
Thank you, Molood, and enjoy your lunch.